At first glance, a tank looks like one of the safest places on the battlefield. Thick steel armor, powerful gun, protection from bullets, shrapnel, and shell fragments. Compared to the infantrymen marching through mud under artillery fire, the tank crewman appears almost comfortable. But when the engines shut down and the guns fall silent, the illusion quickly disappears. Because one of the most dangerous things a tank crew could do was to try and get some sleep. During the Second World War, official regulations recommended that a tank crew spend no more than 10 hours a day inside their vehicle. The rest of the time was meant to be spent outside resting, eating, and sleeping. In combat, though, this was rarely possible. Tanks were constantly on the move. Crews stayed close in case of sudden attacks, counterattacks, or orders to advance. And when rest did come, it was often taken wherever the tank happened to stop. Sleeping inside the tank was almost unheard of. There was no room to lie down and no comfort to speak of. Instead, crews climbed out and slept on the ground beside their vehicle. Some stretched a tarpaulin from the hull to make a crude shelter. Others simply lay in the dirt, boots on, and helmets under their heads. Artillery fire never stopped entirely. Even while resting, shells could land nearby at any moment. To protect themselves, some crews dug shallow trenches in front of their tank, then carefully drove the vehicle over the top. The tank's armored belly acted as a shield against shrapnel while the men slept below. It was an improvised solution, and a dangerous one. On soft ground, the weight of the tank could cause it to sink, and if that happened, the men underneath had little chance of escape, crushed, trapped, or suffocated by the very machine meant to protect them. Many tankers refused to sleep beneath their vehicles at all. Better to take their chances with the enemy shells, they reasoned, than to die under their own tank. This was the reality of rest for a tank crewman, and it was only the beginning. Tanks were built for protection and firepower, not comfort. Inside, space was brutally limited. Crewmen were packed shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by steel walls, ammunition racks, radio equipment, and the massive breech of the main gun. There was no room to stand, no room to stretch, often not even enough room to fully turn around. Every movement had to be practiced and precise. A misplaced elbow or a wrong step could jam the controls or injure a fellow crewman. The air inside the tank was stale and heavy. Exhaust fumes were vented outside, but traces always lingered within the fighting compartment. The smell of oil, fuel, burnt propellant, and sweat mixed all together into a permanent haze. Bathing was rare, fresh clothes, even rarer. After a few days or weeks in the field, the tank itself seemed to absorb the odor of its crew. Then there was the heat. The tank engines generated enormous amounts of heat, especially in summer or in enclosed fighting compartments. Temperatures inside could exceed 100 F. That's about 38 C, even higher during combat. Firing the main gun added to the heat, so did long periods with hatches closed. Dehydration was constant. Heat exhaustion and heat stroke were real threats, even without enemy action, and there were no bathrooms. Crewmen used whatever containers were available, or held it as long as they could. Hygiene was primitive at best. The tank was a weapon. Living inside of it was punishment. Ironically, one of the greatest dangers to a tank crewman wasn't the enemy, but the tank itself. The interior of a tank was bare steel. No padding, no insulation. As the vehicle lurched across rough terrain, the crew was thrown around violently against the walls, the floor, and the gun mount. Heads struck steel. Limbs slammed into equipment. Concussions were common. To reduce injuries, most armies issued specialized tanker helmets. Unlike infantry helmets, these were padded and flexible, designed to protect against impact rather than shrapnel. Even so, injuries were unavoidable. A sudden stop, a sharp turn, or a hidden obstacle could send a crewman crashing into solid metal without warning. Every movement inside a tank carried risk, even when no one was shooting. Despite their size and power, tanks were surprisingly blind. Vision was limited to narrow slits and periscopes. Dust, mud, and debris kicked up by the tracks often coated these viewing ports, reducing visibility even further. In a column of advancing tanks, those in the rear were frequently blinded by dust alone. To compensate, commanders sometimes opened their hatches and leaned out to get a better view. Drivers followed, shouted instructions, or hand signals. In non-combat situations, this was common. In combat, it was deadly. An exposed head was an easy target for snipers, machine guns, and shell fragments. Still, many commanders took the risk. Seeing the battlefield was often worth the danger. When under fire, crews buttoned up, sealing every hatch. Once closed, visibility dropped dramatically. Drivers often moved almost blindly, guided by the commander's voice over the intercom. A single mistake could send the tank into a ditch, a minefield, or directly into enemy fire. If heat and confinement weren't enough, there was also the noise. Tanks were deafening. The engine alone produced a constant roar. Inside the uninsulated steel hull, sound echoed and amplified. Normal conversation was impossible. Crews relied on intercom systems, hand signals, shoulder taps, and even kicks to communicate. In combat, the noise became overwhelming. The main gun firing produced sound levels well over 150 decibels, enough to cause instant pain and permanent hearing damage. Machine guns were little better, firing in long sustained bursts. Nearby artillery explosions rattled the hull and hammered the crew with shockwaves. Some tank helmets included ear protection, but it was limited, and over time, hearing loss became almost inevitable. Many veterans left the war partially deaf, a souvenir of life inside armored steel. Against small arms fire, tanks were nearly invulnerable. Rifle bullets and machine gun rounds bounced harmlessly off the armor, but heavier weapons were a different matter. Enemy tanks, artillery, aircraft, and dedicated anti-tank weapons could penetrate armor at close range. Weapons like anti-tank guns, rockets, and shaped charges turned tanks into priority targets. When a tank was hit, everything happened at once. Armor fragments known as spall could break loose inside the hull, turning the interior into a storm of razor-sharp metal. Ammunition might ignite. Fuel could catch fire. If the damage was severe, the crew's first instinct was simple: get out. Escape routes varied by tank design. Some had multiple hatches, others had only one or two. The training emphasized speed. Crews practiced evacuating again and again, knowing that vital seconds could mean the difference between survival and death. Still, many never made it out. Hatches jammed, fire spread too quickly, tanks overturned or burned from the inside out. A tank that once felt invincible could become a metal coffin in moments. To outsiders, tank crews seemed fortunate. They rode instead of marched. They fought behind armor instead of in open fields. But protection came at a price. They slept in the dirt, breathed in the fumes, endured the crushing heat, blinding noise, and constant exhaustion. Inside the tank, every moment was dangerous, every moment uncomfortable, and when the armor failed, there was often no escape. The tank was one of the most powerful weapons of the Second World War. For the men inside it, though survival was never guaranteed,